Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Devine, and I am a national consultant with Sadlier and the moderator for this afternoon's webinar with Charlene Katra. Before I begin, I would just like to let you know that there are a couple of weather issues in my area and in Charlene's area with storms, thunder, and lightning. If for any reason we get knocked off the air, because that's what happens sometimes, PowerPoint goes down, internet goes down, we will reschedule, we will redeploy invitations to everybody, and you will be notified of the change of dates, all right? But hopefully that will not happen. Charlene Katra is an Associate Director in the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. For 17 years, her passion and principal area of responsibility has been the ministry with people with disabilities. Additionally, she oversees early childhood ministries, including Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. Today, she is here to speak about Think Diversity, Not Disability. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute to minimize background noise. If you have questions, please type them in the question box. We are recording the presentation and we'll do our best, as long as technology cooperates, to get this up for you to view again and share with your colleagues. Those of you live with us today online and who stay for the entire webinar will receive a certificate of participation and also a handout which Charlene has prepared and will be sent out with the thank you by the beginning of next week. It is sent to the email you used to register with, so make sure you do not block emails from Sadlier. If your colleagues listen to a recorded webinar, they do not receive the certificate of attendance. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn over this webinar to Charlene, who will present Think Diversity, Not Disability. It's all yours, Charlene.
Thank you, Judy. Sorry for the delay there. I'm very grateful to you and especially to Sadlier for choosing to make this webinar topic available. It's certainly one that's very near and dear to my heart. My own journey in this ministry began when a family approached my own parish years ago and requested faith formation for their son who had Down syndrome. It happened that my parish catechetical leader knew that I had a special education background and asked me to be Brandon's catechist. Teaching the faith to Brandon was fairly easy and very enjoyable for me, and every year our class grew. But even with my background, I found that there was much more to learn about this ministry in the church, because at that time there were no adapted programs or resources or training available for this specialized ministry. So it's always wonderful to have an opportunity to help further the welcome and the support provided to a beautifully diverse population of our church, whom we are blessed to journey with spiritually. Our goal today is to shift our thinking from disability to diversity, specifically as it relates to teaching the faith to diverse learners, including learners who may have an intellectual or developmental delay. Simply stated, diversity means all the ways we differ. Some of these differences we are born with and cannot change. Actually, anything that makes us unique is part of this definition of diversity. Most importantly, diversity supports inclusion. And we, as church, are called to support the inclusion of all God's people. Whether you already have programs and plans established or are just getting started, I hope you will find the following discussion helpful. So let's begin, confident that God will inspire and direct each of us in ways that we can build up the kingdom in our part of the world. Inclusion involves bringing our diversity together in a way that is beneficial. Inclusion puts the concept and practice of diversity into action by creating an environment of involvement, respect, and connection. We want to move from acceptance I'll tolerate you or your presence, to appreciation, which is where relationships are built and belonging is felt, where individuals who learn or look or behave differently are valued equally or more highly because of their vulnerability and closeness to God. And we remember that it's always about relationships. Yes, sometimes in our humanity, we question God. But when we truly believe what we profess, our actions will speak volumes by the welcome we extend to everyone who comes to us, the one who looks differently or acts differently or learns differently. The word Catholic means all are welcome. We must begin in the beginning with Scripture. Genesis 1:27. God created man in his image. In the divine image he created him. Male and female he created them. Gospel values are about full inclusion. This must be our highest goal too, because it's God's goal. Next, we look at our Catholic tradition, especially the first Catholic social teaching, which reaffirms Scripture regarding the dignity of the human person and our sacredness. This is foundational. Sometimes I suggest to people, consider placing a sticker on your own mirror that simply says, created in God's image. Because I believe the more we believe and internalize that fact about ourselves, the easier it is to see Christ in others. This is a quote from the National Directory for Catechesis that speaks to the gifts each person brings to the Church. The truth is, we need them more than they need us. And another equally affirming quote from the General Directory for the Universal Church. There are two existing church documents for you to be aware of for this ministry. In 1978, the U.S. bishops wrote their pastoral statement on persons with disabilities. It issued a challenge. The challenge was that the doors of the church be always open to persons with disabilities so that they may participate fully in all forms of the community's liturgical celebrations. And it stretched beyond the removal of physical barriers on parish properties, imploring parishes to reflect on their attitudes towards people with disabilities. Why? Because attitudinal barriers can be harder to remove than the physical barriers on our campuses. But church history reflected that many parents of children with disabilities shared great concern and pain that their child, once baptized, was denied access to other sacraments of initiation. So the pastoral statement, issued 12 years before the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, though groundbreaking, unfortunately did not resolve the issue of sacramental access. As a result, parents' continued outcry to parishes across the United States. The United States bishops took a survey, a national survey, and it did, of course, show that there was much exclusion in the reports that were collected. So the data revealed that pastoral and educational reform was seriously needed if the baptismal rights of persons with disabilities to receive their sacraments was to become the norm and not the exception. This document aimed to correct previous practices or misunderstandings. The guidelines for the celebration of the sacraments with persons with disabilities. It followed by specific guidelines for the celebration of the seven sacraments for persons with disabilities. The pastoral statement on the sacraments incorporated the term use of reason, which was closely associated with age of reason, which was the exact term that caused confusion and was commonly the reason used for denying sacraments in the past. Since such terminology does not reveal a person's capacity for intuitive faith or a sense of the sacred, especially in a person with an intellectual or developmental delay, it became the motivating factor for the guidelines to be written. As evidenced by the past, using such terms which have unclear meanings without again causing pain and exclusion. So the experiential and symbolic nature of sacraments suggests a decidedly different understanding, not only about who should be invited to the sacraments, but about how one should be invited to the sacraments. Another quote from the National Directory, also found at the bottom of all my emails, calling us to seek out parishioners who may need more attention and support from us once they are baptized. Every baptized Catholic has 3 baptismal rites. The first one is to be educated in the faith. The second is to be prepared and to celebrate their sacraments. And the third is to respond to God's call. There's no different baptismal rites for any of us. So if you're a baptized Catholic, those are your 3 baptismal rites. Just like the medical profession, our mantra should also be do no harm. It's a quote that says, we share in Christ's sacrifice to the extent we embrace his attitude, his will, and his relationship with the Father. A good question to ask ourselves in situations is this: is what I or we or the church doing, is it helpful or hurtful to a person and or their family? Another quote from the National Directory that affirms our baptismal rights states that although providing such services is challenging to parishes and dioceses, the Church owes persons with disabilities her best efforts in order to ensure that they are able to hear the gospel of Christ, receive the sacraments, and grow in their faith in the fullest and richest manner possible. I think this photo of Pope Francis might depict his feelings about such headlines as those we've just read. I once received an email from someone here locally in Houston that talked about how they had gone to Mass, and at the point when Father went to give his homily, and it was from a scripture verse that he mentioned he had heard probably countless times, he was ready to kind of mentally check out of church because he felt like he couldn't, he'd heard it so many times, what else could someone preach about it? But the interesting part of the email that was sent to me of the gentleman's story was that in church that day, luckily, and at that time when he was about ready to mentally check out, he saw up in front of him in another pew a parent caring for their child in a wheelchair. And he said he ended up focusing on that interaction between the parent and child, and just watched as the parent wiped drool away from the child's mouth, loved on the child, cared for the child, and basically his whole email, and I think it was even titled in the subject line, best sermon he ever heard. That day, that was his sermon. It just kind of emphasizes the importance of encouraging families, supporting families to be involved in the full life of the church, because as I said earlier, we really do need them more than they need us, and God will use them to touch hearts. And I often also say all parishes want the same thing for their parishioners. They want conversion for their people. And again, getting people with disabilities involved in the full life of the church, and then just watch how the Holy Spirit will use them to touch hearts. Let's talk about baselines for sacraments for a moment. Most importantly, first, we never discount catechesis because of a learning difference. We are called to catechize to the best of our ability using various ways and means to meet the real needs of the learner. Also remembering that it could sometimes be what would be considered a sacrament of desire of either a parent or a guardian, especially if possibly the individual may have an intellectual or developmental delay, medically fragile, impending death, situations such as that. But let's just look through, beginning with reconciliation. The baseline for reconciliation, and the question you should ask the parent, is can the individual discern between right and wrong? If they can discern between right and wrong, absolutely we should proceed to prepare them to celebrate this sacrament. If in fact the answer is that they cannot, and the parent would know the answer to this, if we cannot, that they cannot discern between right and wrong, then just know that you can proceed directly to prepare for First Eucharist. So in that situation, again, proceed accordingly to First Eucharist preparation. The other thing about reconciliation, while we're on it for another moment, is that someone is allowed to have someone else go into the reconciliation room with them. That's certainly not typical, but for this community, if there is a need, maybe it really is a sign language interpretation need. Maybe it is the speech is not as clear to someone that's not used to working with someone with different speech patterns. So in a sense, again, a translator might be an assist for this person. Whoever attends with them into the reconciliation and the celebration, of course, is under the same seal as the priest. But again, just to know that that's another kind of option that is available for this community. For First Eucharist, the baseline, of course, is trying to teach someone the difference between regular bread and, of course, Jesus being present in the host. So that is our baseline. And as much as always, as much as we can teach someone beyond those baselines, we absolutely work towards those goals. But just know what the baselines are. And also with First Eucharist, highly recommended that you practice with unconsecrated hosts with this community of persons. Even the smallest piece of a host is fine because that might be all that they could tolerate. If the celebration, for any of the celebration, well, for Eucharist, I should say, for the celebration of Eucharist, if it is easier for the person to celebrate and for the family at a daily Mass versus a large communal celebration, that is absolutely fine and would be recommended also. I would say that would be very pastoral in some situations, if that be their choice, but let them choose. We don't ever want anyone to feel like we're asking them to not be in the full life of the church and with the full communal celebrations. Some parents will tell you they might prefer that, and that would be okay. Also, if someone might be using a feeding tube, you can use either, again, a very small piece of the host, the smallest piece of the host, no less Jesus, could be put just inside the lip of the individual and where it would dissolve. And if it's a feeding tube, and they would also, the other option would be to just put a single drop from like a medicine dropper. And of course, someone that works with the child that would be there would be able to help with this, to administer that directly into a feeding tube, could be another option. Again, the parent or guardian would be able to tell you what would probably be the best approach when it comes down to that detail. And for confirmation, of course, the baseline we're trying to teach someone is that they're receiving the Holy Spirit and or the gifts of the Holy Spirit in this case, because it's confirmation, but building on their baptismal initial receipt of the Holy Spirit. I would say for this one, on preparation end, a couple things to note. Practice signing the cross on their foreheads with baby oil. For some, these things may be needed. Others it may not be, but again, if that would help someone get used to someone touching them and or on the forehead, even the actual feel of oil, if not the actual chrism oil, but oil from like a baby oil, similarly would be helpful. I would also recommend that if there is, if you know which bishop might be coming to preside at the confirmation, I would show that picture of that bishop because they may not have ever met and may not have the opportunity to meet the bishop prior to confirmation. So I would have a picture of the bishop or bishops if you're not sure which one's coming, so that along preparation you're showing them photos of your local bishop so that they can be prepared to recognize someone maybe a little more than having never seen someone before. Again, understanding that person has to then touch their forehead and sign them and things like that. You certainly can do adapted sessions for preparation. Maybe they are not going to as many classes as another candidate. Maybe their class time is not as long. We had an adapted confirmation preparation program here where we had a community of youth or young adults with intellectual and developmental delays in particular that gathered just once a month for 2 hours, and that was their regular formation for 8 months. One of those sessions was longer than typical 2 hours. It was 5 hours. So it started with lunch. It was a family. It was kind of billed as a family retreat. So the family all came together. We had lunch at noon. They had sessions, family retreat sessions all afternoon, and ended at 5 o'clock with them attending the vigil mass. And that was the confirmation retreat for this one community of folks. That was a much better fit than an expectation of them going on weekend retreats alone without family, when that would not have been helpful. Again, it would have been hurtful. It would have been very stressful and anxiety-ridden for the individual as well as families often. So again, feel free to make those kind of adaptations as you need to either the sessions and or retreats. Unfortunately, there typically is not an adapted mass, though, for confirmation. So that's, but again, I've never seen anyone, even of our youth or young adults, that have gone through an adapted formation. And I know it was just the Holy Spirit, but they never had a problem, even with a lengthy mass, a large, lengthy communal mass. I've never seen a problem. So again, I think that's just us giving them to God, and it's all good. Also remembering finally that spiritual understanding can be shown through gesture or respectful temperament. And lastly, on sacraments, of course, in our brief discussion, make sure to advise the clergy always in advance when you have someone coming in with any kind of learning difference or behavioral difference, so that they also have their best pastoral hat on, okay? Just some more pictures from one of our last celebrations that I was just speaking to you about. And look at how happy all the priests are that are in that picture, all the clergy behind Cardinal DiNardo. Again, it was a very joyful time. And again, it affirms the entire family's Catholic identity. Whatever we do for one person, we're doing for that entire family. This is very much a ministry of hospitality and evangelization. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. There's great diversity among all of us gathered right now on this webinar. Our differences may be visible or invisible. They may be physical, intellectual, behavioral, or emotional. So if we reflect upon the constant initiation by God to pour out His grace on all people, and we remember that all people respond according to their own abilities, we're more likely to see the image of God, the face of Christ, in all people. And one of my mantras has always been, you can't say you're pro-life if you don't respect the living. Learning happens through a variety of means: auditory, visual, tactile, kinesthetic. But we each have a preferred learning style that works best for us. That's why a multisensory teaching approach is needed to reach every learner. What some learners need is actually good for everyone. As you can see by this slide, I've changed the typical wording for the acronym for ADD and ADHD to remind us of how our mindset changes our behavior. ADA symptoms, or attention deficit disorder symptoms, can include difficulty sitting still, listening, concentrating, waiting, completing tasks, working independently. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, may have similar symptoms of ADD, combined with characteristics associated with hyperactivity, and is typically more common in boys than girls. It's important to remember that the behavior we observe has an underlying motivator. The individual who has difficulty remaining seated may actually be confused or frustrated. Considering that, we might be more likely to respond differently than if we believe that the intent is to be disruptive or defiant. Did you know that 1 in 6 children struggle daily with sensory processing challenges? This is the process by which our brain takes in sensory input and interprets this information for use. For some, a tactile object like those shown here can have a centering and calming effect, which can aid someone when trying to process information. Having a selection of such items available to offer someone or for someone to self-select is very beneficial. We all experience things differently. I may prefer something soft and quiet. You might prefer something bright that has moving parts. Parents can often advise what type of item or items their child or youth or adult will either crave or resist, or they may already have their own preferred items. And I would say as church, to that collection that you see there, a rosary or even a scented candle to smell would be good additional items to consider adding to your collection. But I strongly encourage you to consider starting to compile some items like these to keep available at a retreat or in a classroom setting, possibly even again a small, even an item or two that could even be used if someone needed just to focus when they're in a pew in a church. And again, that might be an appropriate place even to have something like rosaries to have out for people to use. Well, many of us already know and love someone with autism, and so I'm just going to read through a few characteristics that sometimes are associated with someone who is, has a diagnosis of autism, or as they say, is on the autism spectrum. Okay? They may have impairments in social understanding and social skills. They can have sensory issues. They may be more comfortable with adults, have difficulty establishing and maintaining friendships with peers, difficulty understanding and using body language, interprets language literally, has difficulty in understanding and discussing feelings, often fails to seek clarification, maybe have difficulty regulating their emotions, or have poor organizational skills. So those were just some characteristics. Again, it wasn't a comprehensive list, but it kind of gives you a bit of an idea. And some of you may already work with persons on the spectrum and be able to relate to some of those characteristics. On this screen, I just tell you, please pay attention to the message on the left of the screen. It's very important for anyone who considers themselves a catechist or an educator. And because we know, for those who are especially able to now self-advocate, those who are on the spectrum and can self-advocate and can tell us this information today, again, critical for us to comprehend it. So the person who sometimes might seem like they're not engaged or maybe really even needs to walk around the peripheral of the room while you're teaching might really, if they could, for those who maybe can't speak out in the way we do, if they could, they might be able to retrieve everything that you have said and give it back to you verbatim, maybe even more focused in understanding what you're saying than the person who might be giving you direct eye contact and has kind of mentally checked out. So it's very important that we understand that they know more than they say, think more than they speak, and certainly notice more than we might realize. A really #1 best practice would be to provide a buddy. So anytime you have someone who is, and I hope on your registration forms you already have some kind of question that might ask and might latest best suggestion for a question on a registration form would just be to ask if someone needs any accommodations. Because a parent who has a child with any kind of diagnosis or disability will understand what you're asking in that question. Do they need any accommodations? Another parent who even doesn't understand the question clearly probably doesn't have that need for their child. But that kind of question, once you get a response to that, of course I hope you have a follow-up individual conversation with the parent or guardian, but that also is the point of your knowing you want to provide a buddy for this person. Now, peer mentoring works well, so it could be with just another, maybe a person they're already in a session or a class studying with, working with, that is, more focused, more on task. That could be a buddy. Another option would certainly be youth in the parish, young adults, or adults in the parish. I have seen repeatedly and strongly believe in inviting those preparing for confirmation candidates, since we want them to be involved in parish ministries during that couple year. In Houston, it's a 2-year process in parish ministries, in hopes that obviously as they are confirmed that they will have found a ministry that fits their gifts and they would continue with it into adulthood. So to invite them to serve in this ministry is our responsibility to make that call, because remember, one of our baptismal rites is to respond to a call, but you can't respond to a call that you haven't heard. So again, please extend to them this ministry, this specialized ministry, as an option for, along with other ministries in the parish, that they could choose to serve in during their formation. I will tell you, the ones who respond to the call to this ministry will likely end up in the healthcare field in some form or fashion in their adulthood. And that's because basically they have the needed gifts. They have the patience, the compassion, the social justice heart, etc. I always say I don't know their future, but I believe I know their future when they respond to this, to serve in this ministry. And again, you can see on the other side of the screen just the statistics that are current for autism. And unfortunately, they did not go up this past year. The CDC report luckily said that they did not increase, but they have certainly gone up rapidly in recent years, many of us know. And this is Dr. Temple Grandin. Some of you may be familiar with her, one of the best known probably self-advocates today in the world. And you can read her, well, her quote there about being not a language-based thinker, but a visual, and having a mind like Google Images. But also her quote there about, I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. So what? She would just scream. And I just say to you, remember, all behavior is communication, right? So as someone who's not able to stay in their seat and has difficulty attending sometimes, they may be very confused and frustrated themselves. So again, the more we know and understand beyond just the symptom we're seeing, what's motivating that, the easier it would be for us to be able to help them. Again, it might be a matter of giving them one of those fidgets or one of those tactile objects to hold on to, or to help them focus, or to help them become calm again. But our job really, I believe, oftentimes is trying to help lower everyone's frustration level, okay? Because again, faith formation and certainly sacramental preparation and celebrations should be a joyful experience for everyone involved. These tips right here, we'll just go through them. Operate on flex time. One thing here to note, and which is very important for us to remember, is it takes for some folks twice as much time to do half as much work. So that's a nice little, phrase to remember in regards to knowing how much work to ask of someone, how much time to allow them. And especially in regards to time, you give someone a matter of time, you're talking about concrete thinkers, and sometimes we talk in an abstract term. Even our faith, we're teaching the faith, sometimes we're very much teaching abstract concepts to concrete thinkers. So we have to figure out ways to do that make it more understandable to them. But know about the twice as much time to do half as much work. use a visual timer. I put a picture here of one this is actually one you can actually purchase, and it can set on a desk, and you can buy them in different sizes. But it is a visual, and this one's called Time Timer. So if you went online and went timetimer.com, these will come up, and you can purchase one if you choose, and it will actually count down the time backwards. So there's actually a visual marker between the red and the white, so the individual can see exactly how many more minutes or how much red is left before the session or the task or whatever is concluding. So that's very helpful, and I suggest you either use something like this one, or it could be other visual timers. There are certainly many other visual timers you could use. You might want to provide, as well as a visual time, I would also back it up with verbal. I would say, when the timer is saying you have 5 minutes left, I would announce we have 5 minutes remaining, 4 minutes remaining, etc., 3 minutes remaining. So make sure to give both verbal and visual cues as much as possible. It might be a good idea to have them either an option of either maybe arriving a little late to class or leaving a little early from a class or a session or a retreat time, if that would help them, again, to enjoy themselves and to be able to be present without having any kind of an issue about either the crowds in the hall. Sometimes it's just too crowded in hallways. Just things that can change to where it's a good experience for them. So again, just modify the requirements. Manage the environment. Persons on the spectrum also often have daily stress and anxiety that is far beyond anything we've probably occasionally experienced. So since they live on such a high degree of stress and especially anxiety, we want to help them prepare for their day and their time with us. Managing the environment is even how I started this session. I think one of the very first slides had just an agenda. Now I put the agenda there, not that you necessarily needed it, but it's nice to kind of see the roadmap of the time we're going to spend together, what's going to happen in the order it's going to happen in. So again, imagining someone with a lot of anxiety, the more that they can see that schedule, and I would suggest in a room or in a, again I say on retreats or other places, you can certainly have a piece of paper that can give them a brief agenda of the schedule, the day or the hour. It could also be printed on a board or a post-it note or other things that are visual in the room, but as well as having something that they could pick up when they walk in. Many people will walk by it and not need to pick it up, but you might have some pick it up, and you may have some that pick it up that will absolutely never put it down. They will live by that schedule that you have given them. The other thing I will tell you, though, because they like to follow schedules and they like routine, and that's very helpful because it's predictable, so it helps them be a little less anxious. Sometimes schedules change, so for that reason I often say, I would even encourage you to write at the bottom of your agenda or your schedule. I didn't today, even though we worried about the weather, and luckily it's held out just fine. But you could even write at the bottom of a schedule or an agenda, the schedule may change. Just typically just putting those words so again they know that there's a possibility. So again, use visuals, build in relaxation, provide choices. Anytime you can give people a choice between doing A or B, it provides a feeling of being in control. Especially maybe it's a choice of even whether to sit or stand when they're waiting or things like that. Especially waiting can be hard. Teach how to and when to and what to. Sometimes some of us learn things kind of intuitively, others do not. So they might actually need to be taught what to do and when to do it. I mean, really breaking it down step by step. So just keep that in mind. If someone doesn't respond to something you ask of them, they may really not know how to do something or when's the appropriate time to do something. So they might need some cueing on that. Create a balanced agenda. Basically just create an agenda that conserves energy. So if you're doing something kind of a little more stimulating, you want to do something a little more relaxing after it. And I would transition every, depending on the age, could be 10-15 minutes before you transition to something else. Certainly shorter amounts of time the younger the people that you're working with are. And monitor demands, again, sensory issues, we talked about them just briefly earlier, but again, you can go from calming activities to alerting activities. Excuse me. My apologies. Sharing the agenda, use visual and verbal supports. We've talked about that a little bit briefly, but that includes things like maps or lists or outlines, menus, reminders. Anything that you can do to help share an agenda is good. And simplify language. I guess I certainly am guilty of this, and since I say to people, sometimes we just talk too much and we use too many words to get across our meanings. So be more specific and clear. I would also say, with simplifying language, to watch for literalness. I often kind of use the comment about you might say to someone, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute to someone possibly on the spectrum. They take you literally. They may actually literally hold on to you, take your hand or your arm, and they may be looking for a clock to count 60 seconds. Okay, so it's not uncommon that they will take you very literally. So watch the way you say something. Basically, say what you mean. Teach hidden curriculum rules. Social skills are not their strength. So that's very challenging to someone on the spectrum. It may be as simple as talking about when they're going out in the hall, maybe transitioning in classes or etc., that if they get bumped, it's probably not on purpose. It's probably an accident, just so they're aware, because otherwise they might not know that is just something that could happen in a crowded hallway by accident. And of course, stay away from metaphors, sarcasms, generalities, because it's not something that they would be able to understand well. And then our last 5 of these 10 points is number 6 is set a calm, positive tone. And basically, of course, this is pretty simple. It's just model acceptance and, of course, tolerate no bullying in your presence or amongst the members of the group. And then verbalize your actions. I say, you know, it equates to living out loud. When you walk around the room, maybe you're going in the back of the room, you can't find your ink pen or your glasses, your eyeglasses. If you're walking around the room, let them know I'm walking around the room to see if anybody needs my assistance. I'm walking to the back of the room to, you know, pick up my ink pen. Just say out loud what you're doing, because again, for someone who's more anxious than others, not knowing why you're walking away from your post or the front of the room is a little concerning. Ask, listen, and wait. It's just really a matter of being patient, asking questions, but being patient for the response. They need, again, more time sometimes to process language as well. And then listen to the words and seek and offer clarification. And lastly, provide reassurance. Reduce uncertainty to reduce anxiety, meltdowns, etc. Okay? So providing schedules, reiterating schedules, 5-minute notices, divide tasks and timelines in smaller increments, and then check in. Check in to see if they understood what you said, reassure them they're on task. Absolutely just give as much positive feedback as you can, and be specific. You know, I always say everyone should know everyone's name, but not because they're being called out for anything other than being on task, and just continue to praise them and when they're doing things right. And the final best practice really for all of us always to keep in mind, and maybe to help share with others, is just the adage of be curious and not judgmental. I think we'd all do a lot better if we would continue to do that. And as this says, a lot of our families do experience deep isolation and our job really is to practice Christ-like hospitality. I've got a list here of some Catholic websites that I want to make sure you're aware of. The National Catholic Partnership on Disability, of course, is the national office over this ministry. Every diocese and parish has different levels of support available. If you have a need beyond what is provided by your local church, please contact them or any of the others listed, of course, for assistance. And this one here coming up now, Sadlier's website offers an index to their catechetical programs for parishes and schools for grades K through 8. It identifies additional strategies, activities, and alternative assessments by page and section in their grade level guide to help you meet the needs of diverse learners. So more thanks to Sadlier for that. And this next page is again some additional websites, secular websites, some of the associations for some of the different diagnoses that are always helpful to, again, become familiar with as the need arises. And these two pages, just so you know, especially the two pages of websites, this screen and the screen before, the Catholic websites, is the handout, and if you didn't hear the initial announcement at the beginning, that you will receive, I think, via email from Sadlier later. So don't worry about not having those links. They'll all be sent to you. And in those surprises, in this Jubilee year, may we see God's artistry in one another so that we think diversity, not disability, in our embrace of all God's people. And I think at this point, if Judy has questions or comments we can discuss now, I'd be delighted to do so.
Charlene, thank you so much. That was lots of information and really makes one think. And I do have some questions here for you, so I'm going to go back to the beginning here. Excuse me, I've got a tickle here. This is at the very beginning. If I have only one child with a disability like autism and 9 other children without disabilities, how can I make sure the lesson will be adaptable to all the children?
I would, depending on where the child is on the spectrum, and the mantra also is if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child or one person with autism. So like any diagnosis, there's such a range of where someone may be on it with their diagnosis. But nonetheless, the parent, again, as always, can guide you greatly. I would, again, be providing a buddy, so someone that can help, even though you might be moving ahead a little bit, and it might be a little too fast for someone, this one child. I would hope that their peer mentor or their buddy could help them to stay on task as much as possible. They certainly could have another activity to do during some parts of the session that might be more adapted to meet their own needs. It might not be the exact same thing, but again, with a buddy or someone to work with them. So they're still included. We want to have everyone included, again, remember the gospel values, as much as possible together. So it's great that you continue to work towards having that person not segregated or in a separate, like I said, when I started years ago, it was a one-on-one situation. We didn't have anything else going them, but that class grew. And then the goal was, once they started getting more familiar with being in a class and in a program, and relationships, again, were being built, they could be included then into kind of the fold with all the other existing rooms and classrooms, age appropriately. Even though the abilities might be different, it's a whole nother lesson on differentiated instruction, though, when you're kind of doing a few different things at the same time in a class. But the fact that we're working towards that and have I would say even first and foremost, the open heart to have that person there with an assistant to help them be involved and included as much as possible, trust me, God will bless that. They will get something out of that. And again, the more training and things you can go to, the more you can learn specific or maybe a little more detailed strategies.
Okay, Charlene, next we have, is it inclusion if you have special sessions for the people with disabilities, if regular placement in regular class sessions, their needs can't be met, or their age isn't appropriate?
Right. It's not black and white, I will tell you that. I believe that, and I know that every parish, like every family, is not created equal, is the way I say it. So there's a variation of what resources each parish may have currently available. I know here we have some parishes very advanced in this ministry, and I have other parishes doing something and others maybe barely starting. So like I said, there's such a range, so wherever you are, you can only work with the resources you currently have, and that's okay. And if there's some students that it is I almost say not best for them, but that they will be maybe engaged more appropriately, at least for a while, in a small group of students with similar abilities and or the level they're working at. As long as that group, even if they're a kind of self-contained group, as long as they're meeting at the same time and place as everybody else. I once went to a parish where they had a group like that of some youth who had some intellectual or developmental delays together in a class, and even though they had some other peers and with them that were more typical learners, which that also, those buddies, that's what that kind of blends to where they're still with others, because they need to learn more appropriate behavior sometimes too. So that's why we need to be together as much as possible. But if not full inclusion in existing rooms, then I would say you have, what you're talking about, more of a small group that maybe occasionally goes together with the larger group for different communal, maybe prayer services or parts of retreats or things like that, but otherwise might work on their own. Nothing wrong with that. It's not a right or wrong. It's just that's what you're doing now, and that's what works best for the people that God has put in front of you today. And again, it still could be a possibility sometimes of a one-on-one and even sometimes a home-based instruction. But I would always leave that option, especially to a parent or guardian. You don't ever want to give a home-based option, especially to someone, without them asking for that from us, which of course that's a domestic church, that's their right if they choose to do that, and we could provide them with resources and directions to do that. But again, I would caution you on that.
Sorry, Charlene.
No problem.
The other thing, and I have a feeling this might be found within the list of websites that you gave, somebody asked for a list of the autism and other characteristics that you shared. Or was that from that book that you referenced, Simply?
Well, I don't know if they're in the book that I referenced, but that is a great book. I suggest people look up that book for a little more, unpacking of what we just briefly spoke about.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that slide. It's called Adapted from Simple Strategies That Work.
Correct. It's a small book that's got a lot of good information in it. Easy to read, of course.
And the author, there's 3 authors there?
Well, I believe it was 2 or 3. I don't have it in front of me right now.
Okay, I have it right here. Let me give it to them. If anybody would like to copy this, it's Simple Strategies That Work by Miley, M-Y-L-E-E, by Adrian, Adrian, A-D-R-E-O-N, and I can't say the last one, I'll spell it, Gitlitz, G-I-T-L-I-T-Z.
Correct.
But Simple Strategies That Work, if you look that up on the internet, I'm sure it will come up.
Right, and under the characteristics of some of the different diagnoses, either definitely the secular resources there for those various diagnoses, I'm sure have their characteristics listed, because again, I didn't give it was not a comprehensive list, it was just short lists of some
right. Okay, and then finally we have a comment was just made, actually in this diocese on registration forms, when asked about special needs or accommodations, it is not uncommon for parents not to respond. Catechists may not know a youngster has a need until the catechist session is happening.
And
so that was just a comment that was made.
And I would just affirm that that is a reality everywhere, and that's something that's often commented on when I present it out, out with folks, because, and I always say it like this, parents sometimes don't disclose something, we can just say for a variety of reasons possibly. It's kind of in that category of something you might not be able to control. What we can control is at least posing the question and having an opportunity to for them to give the information. I would also, again, that's when I go back to families now, is I caution you, be careful and treat them with such care. Sometimes, especially on this exact note, I tell you they can have a very different opinion of how or what to do between the husband and the wife, the parents.
Okay.
Seen it time and time again, among those variety of reasons why. One parent may want to disclose, the other one may not. You know, I had an incident once where it came to where there really was a kind of a bit of a crisis at a parish one day, and it wasn't until something actually happened to where the other parent, in hindsight, finally kind of came around and said, okay, I can see now why we maybe should have disclosed something. But because we didn't, it is a challenge, and I also say to parishes and catechists or leaders, you know, our job is not to diagnose, of course not, but what you can say to a parent, and I think this is maybe a good way to say something to a parent that is, we want to be their ally, not otherwise. So to ask them, or to state it like this, we've observed this behavior. Have you observed it? Because if we're observing it, especially in faith formation where we're only meeting them once a week for an hour or so, chances are we know the answer to the question. So it doesn't put them on the defensive. It's just saying, we're observing this. Have you observed it? 9 out of 10 times, I suspect they're going to say yes. At least it opens up for, again, a dialogue for us to say, to then maybe ask, how do you respond? Because a parent may already have a coping strategy or mechanism in place. If the child's already of school age, then we also have an option of asking the parent, what are they doing, how do they respond to this behavior at the day school during Monday through Friday? Again, now you're looking at either a public or a private school system that may have a special educator there that, and if the parent gives us authorization, feel free to ask a parent for authorization to talk to the child's school teacher, special ed especially, or resource or life skills person that they may have already in there, they're among their resources. Because with their authorization, that person that we contact, I've done it before myself, they will be surprised to hear from us, but they will be elated to help us. And, I always joke, but I'm seriously, once in a while you find some of those folks too that, guess what, they're Catholic. And we aren't all called to be lectors or, Eucharistic ministers, etc. But many of us would, if they were asked, might be happy to help a parent, maybe just to look at their curriculum and offer some adaptations to their level, or even help you know exactly how to work with one in particular child that they may already be working with and know and love very well during the weekdays. So again, use your resources wisely, and these are some of our resources.
Okay, 2 other quick ones here. Do you think the catechists need to have CPR training for children? I ask it because we had a student who has epilepsy and she has had an attack in the classroom. We call 911.
Right. I don't know that, it's certainly it certainly would be a best practice. We do not require that here in our area. I don't know about others on just across the board mandatory. Again, I think it's a great best practice, probably more proactive than most are. The only thing I would say in that, from what I heard, was if I know that someone has seizures or has epilepsy or has a certain, again, challenge that we could be more proactive in, especially because we know they're now going to be with us, then that would be, to me, the time to actually make sure that someone is designated in the room with that person that can do some of those things. If that would be a matter of life and death for someone, if before 911 could respond, that would be just smart and helpful on our part. Again, helpful or hurtful, that would be helpful.
Okay. Here we go. What would you suggest for a teen who is blind and the parent does not want them in general catechesis, but the director does want them in general catechesis because the director thinks the teen would be fine in general catechesis? Would you disagree with the parent?
Well, I don't think you have. I don't think we'd be able. I think it'd be a little bit of a slippery slope, or not maybe again the best pastoral choice to disregard a parent, because I assume if the child's either under 18 and or the parent's still even legal guardian if they were older, I don't know how we can go against what the parent's wishes are on something. If the child was able to make their own choice, I don't know, again, I don't know the whole detail of this person's situation. Do I think the child could get something out of coming to the class and being with everyone? I absolutely believe that, yes. Would I think I would have the authority over a parent to control that? I don't know that I would feel I would. I think I would just try to continue to have, there's, what I guess what it tells me is there's a reason why the parent is concerned with that. And that may be some, maybe there's an experience we don't know about, the parent having the child was younger in an inclusive room. There's something probably, again, motivating the parent's behavior to not want them involved. Even though I would agree with the leader in this case that we could do it, they would enjoy it probably also. I would work on that relationship with the parent to get to know a little bit more about really what's motivating the I don't want them involved. I would tend to guess almost afraid for some reason or another, because then maybe pastorally we can help them over that, and then it's everyone wins.
Okay, this is to be honest a broad question, but maybe what is the best way to provide inclusion and support to parents and families of a child with a disability?
Best way? I really tell you, be there for them. Be there for them and be proactive in being there for them. Don't judge them. Be curious. They are trying and working hard with sometimes very challenging moments or days or years, unlike some others of us, or that might have a simpler life or a different life. So by their life circumstances, they have a handful, a plateful, platterful, whatever you want to say. So I think our best thing we can do for them, and I say to people today, even I showed a couple pictures of Pope Francis. I said, if you say Pope Francis to people today, especially in regards to this ministry, if they don't get it, knowing what Pope Francis has been showing us, I don't know how else to kind of help the rest of us get on board to say we just need to love the people, see them, see Christ in them, be there for them, be patient, be compassionate, listen more than we talk. They have a lot to offer the church, and I'll tell you, and I know this, other denominations sometimes aggressively seek out some of our youth and adults with disabilities. That's great. I mean, we should all be seeking them out. But when they're seeking out, sometimes, I know we've had Catholic families, probably in a lot of places in the world, if not the U.S., that have gone to another church sometimes, even when that also has caused some marital strife in families, just because another church or another denomination was offering things for their child. They're going to go where their child's needs are going to get met, because their child, by their life circumstances, is their priority. So on that note, again, it's note to self, we need to do more. We need to serve our Catholic families so our Catholic families can be affirmed, again, their Catholic identity, and stay in the church. Again, I said this is a ministry of hospitality and evangelization, and sometimes it's re-evangelization of our families, because they are sometimes missing in our pews for a variety of reasons. Remember how I mentioned earlier about some of the attitudinal barriers. So, maybe sometimes it's just how some other Catholics in the church, do or don't receive them. It might not be us personally, but someone else. And when you tell me you don't have anyone with a disability or a diagnosis in your program, it tells me you got a little work to do, but it also tells me, great, go teach everybody else that's in front of you and help raise their awareness about social justice and compassion for the disability community, so that the next generation, of course, always does better.
Charlene, I don't know if you can see the screen, but I have lost it. Can you send it back to me?
The screen?
Yeah, can you? I have lost it completely, and I don't know if Christine is still on the line. Christine, are you still there? Okay, those of you who asked other questions, I apologize, but I have lost my screen, and I don't know why. It could be the storm. So okay, if you could do me a favor, can you open your panel, Charlene? You know that panel that you push to the side?
I am, yes.
Can you open it?
What? Which one? It's open now.
Okay, do me a favor. Let me just thank everybody for attending, and I apologize for not being able to get to the last questions. But what I'm going to ask you to do, Charlene, is as I say thank you to everyone, Charlene, particularly thank you to you. If you could just click on stop recording. Do you see that button?
Absolutely.
Please do so. Thank you, and God bless everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.